So last week we took a look at the housing market and spoke about what happens during this rate hikes compared to the last two that we have went through for the last 20 years. Largely, we can expect a lot of properties to sell under asking. So I thought for this week, it would be perfect to dive a little bit into the house buying process for first-time homeowners and also investors and talk about some tips and tricks that you should keep in mind to ensure that you're 100% ready for your new home. Now, before we start, if you haven't already, make sure you like this video to show support and also join our private Facebook group where we have almost 5,000 members, and in there you can ask any financial questions you may have or get more resources and sharing from our other members. Alright, with that out of the way, without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So what we're going to do here, I thought, is we will break down into different stages of home purchasing and then talk about the steps inside each stage and what you should be watching out for. And this is going to be applicable to both first-time homeowners for self-use or investors looking for your next rental properties. Now, basically, when you buy any properties, there are three stages you need to pay attention to: the research phase, the house hunting phase, and also the completion phase. So first, let's talk a little bit about the research phase. This is the part where you have to get all your numbers down so then you understand exactly what is your budget, what is the range of properties that you may be able to consider, and what are those that are completely out of your reach. And you should know these things so then you don't get emotional during the house hunting phase and overbid and then find yourself into a corner. And then here there are three major items you want to get down. The first one is the down payment. And for the down payment part, the thing I want to focus on is the RRSP Homebuyer plan, which is where you can draw up to $35,000 out of your RRSP to buy your home. Now, if you don't know what that is, I have another video right here talking about this in more detail, so you can click there. But I'm sure most people actually know how this works. So here, I just want to focus on two tricks or hidden rules that you may be able to take advantage of. The first trick is what happens when you have one spouse that is either not working or making significant less or don't have enough RRSP room. Does not mean now you're stuck with only one spouse can buy the 35K RRSP for themselves and the other spouse cannot do so. Well, actually, you can get by this obstacle by using something called Spousal RRSP. Now, simply put, Spousal RRSP is the exact same procedure as if someone buying RRSP for themselves, but the only difference is now the owner is the other spouse. You're still using the original spouse income and also the RRSP room, only the owner is changed to the other partner. And this is very important because what you could do is if you are the only income earner in the house or you're the one with a much higher tax bracket, you can actually buy $35,000 of RRSP on yourself and then buy $35,000 of spousal RRSP for your other partner. At the end, you will still be able to write off $70,000 of your own income plus using $70,000 of your own RRSP room. But now you can draw this RRSP 35K from your side and then 35K from your spouse's side, even if that spouse has never worked and have no RRSP room. This way you can get double the tax write-off from before and also be able to pull $70,000 back out for your own home. Now, obviously, the thing to pay attention to here is make sure the higher income spouse have $70,000 RRSP room. Now, there are more nuances to these kind of rules to make sure it works. For example, you have to put the RRSP in there for 90 days before you touch it for your own home. But for a complete list of criteria, I provided a link in the description below to take you to the CRA website to check that out. Moving on, next, another trick you can do is actually you can use a home buyer plan even if you have a home already. Now, for this to work, there are two major things you need to have happen. Number one is you cannot have any existing balance in your RRSP home buyer plan. So if you have used it before and you haven't refilled the account, you cannot do this following trick. The second most important point is even if you have a home, for the last 4 years, you cannot be occupying that home and you have to be renting somewhere else or living elsewhere. So for example, if you bought an investment home and you held it for this time and you never lived in it, you want to buy another home for your own use, you can actually use the $35,000 from your RRSP home buyer plan because you have never occupied the first home that you purchased. Now, this is rare, but in some situations, my clients can actually make use of this. So if you're in this boat or thinking about doing something like this, keep this in mind and maybe bring it up to your advisors or CPA to discuss a potential use of RRSP home buyer plan. Now, moving on, the second item you want to make sure you have it down is the mortgage amount that you can borrow. So this one is very simple. Whenever you're about to buy a home, make sure you do a mortgage pre-approval so you understand what's your max borrowing power now, and also what would happen if the interest rate were to go up 1%, and how would that affect your borrowing power then. Now on this, I really prefer to work with a mortgage broker instead of a staff at a bank. This is just based on my personal experience. The broker, for example, that I use is very knowledgeable. He has full knowledge and access to most of the bank products anyway, and he is able to tell me, given my situation every time, what is the bank that we should be looking for and what is the rate and also the max borrowing amount that we should be expecting. And on here, one thing I would recommend is definitely get something called a refinanceable mortgage, where you can pay down your principal every month, and as you do so, the principal amount converts to a home equity line of credit automatically on the other side. This will provide you a ton of flexibility and can save you some hassle and money in the future, so then you don't have to refinance to get the equity out of your homes. Now, last thing to remember is that a pre-approval doesn't mean you're 100% approved. It's just a soft yes based on the current situation. When you get your property, you still have to go through the actual approval process to make sure the bank actually can lend you the money, which is why later we'll talk about subject to financing as a condition on a home is extremely important for you to have. Next, moving on, the third item you should pay attention to is the cash flow after you become a homeowner. Now, this is something very important, but it's often missed. For myself and my client, I make sure we go through this part thoroughly before they move on to the house hunting phase. Now, on the screen, you see an example of a spreadsheet that we usually use to go through these kind of scenarios together. We look at mortgage payment, the down payment we might be using, the house we're buying, any closing costs. But the most important part is to look at ongoing expenses from this new property. If it is investment home, then you would also want to add maybe rental tax on top as well, just so you have a good idea what is your net cash flow position after you acquire this rental property. Now, next, what is most important is after you get an estimated cash flow, you should apply that to your existing budget and your income, so then you have a good idea whether it will be outside of your current budget. If it is, then what you want to do is work on your current budget to see if there's anything you can trim so that it can fit inside your budget after you become a homeowner. And if your conclusion is you cannot make this budget work with the new home expense, then maybe even if you can afford that kind of mortgage, you shouldn't buy this home because you can't afford it with your cash flow or current spending. This part I think is the most tedious, but you need to spend more time on and be 100% certain before we move on to the next phase. Alright, so once we have the research phase down, next let's talk about the house hunting phase. Now here we'll be looking for a property that fits our budget and to our liking. And before, I've actually made a video on the top things you should watch out for while you're hunting for properties, some internal issues that you may be able to spot or red flags that you need to be careful of. So I'm not going to review too much on here. If you're interested, check out the video I've linked here, and that should be suggesting right above my head. The only thing that I would say here is more for condo users is to make sure you pay attention to the meeting minutes for your condo. And in here, I would say you should probably review up to the last year of meeting minutes one by one, and you should be looking for things that are, for example, the 3/4 resolution votes, any of those that's going on, because usually that means they are big enough decisions that require 3/4 of the council to vote yes before they can approve. Usually these are financial related things like big fixes that require everyone to chip in money. Other than that, you should also see if there's any concern raised by any members to see if maybe there's a very troublesome neighbor, maybe there's leaks that happen that may not require fixes for now, but may do so in the future. And also another tip is that when you actually go there and check out the properties, as you step into the elevator, you can look for the bulletin boards that usually is around that place, and also look for the notices that are inside the elevator to give you a better sense of what is actually going on in this building right now. Now, after you found a property you like, it's time to make an offer. And when you are making an offer, the most important thing to pay attention to is the condition that is attached to your offer. Now, in a real estate deal, these are called subjects. And the two most common subjects to attach here is the subject to inspection and subject to financing. Meaning that you're not going to buy this house if the inspection or the mortgage approval process doesn't work out. I know sometimes agents or yourself may feel a little bit pressure to get this dream property, and you may be thinking about why don't we make an offer with no subject condition, meaning that don't worry about inspection, don't worry about financing, we'll get it done, we're just buying it right now. I highly recommend you don't do anything like this, especially for the inspection part, because you could really be buying into a property that has a ton of issues and you just can't see on the surface. Now, if there is subject in place, usually you have about 10 days to remove the subject. So in this 10 days, you need to make sure the inspection is done, and also the mortgage has a very high chance of approving. If you have done the mortgage pre-approval we talked about, this process should be all taken care of within 10 days. Now, once that's done, info will be sent to our lawyer. Then next we can move on the last phase, which is after completion. And here, if it is for self-use, then congratulations, you have bought your very first home or your next home. Just go and enjoy yourself. But if you're actually buying for rental purpose, then this part I'm going to be talking about some tips and tricks you can employ to make sure you find the proper tenant for your property. Now on here, I'll be actually quoting an article by my realtor, Carolyn Chen, who works out of Vancouver and is someone that I've used for all my real estate dealings. Very wonderful article talking about some tips that you should pay attention to find the proper tenant. I've also provided the link in the description below. I think it's only in Chinese, but you can probably copy the whole thing into Google Translate if you want to read the full article. Now there are 5 tips that we should be paying attention to. The first tip is to avoid renting multi-bedroom properties to different individuals. This is most common for apartment near university. 2 or 3 bedroom can go for a lot of rent, so students like to chip in together, combine, and share. Doing so, you can definitely earn a much higher overall rent comparing to just renting to one big family, but there are much higher potential for trouble. For example, roommates can fight, or one can have financial trouble and now you have lost rent, or they have damaged the house and the other two is refusing to pay for it. Also, a lot of young people living together can get quite noisy, which can lead to noise complaints. And especially if you're in a condo, after multiple complaints, the strata do have the right to fine you, which can eat into your profit. Now, tip number 2 is that renter's job and their saving account is much more important than the credit report. Credit report is important as it can show whether this person has any bad debt and how they're doing with their credit card and line credit obligations, but it tells nothing about their previous rental payment habits. So this is why you want to understand the renter's job, especially during the time where there could be recession coming up. You really want to understand what kind of line of work they're in and how prone are they to getting fired during recession. Now the same can be said about saving account. If this person has 6 to 12 months of rent saved up already and ready to use, this can suggest a lot of stability. The third tip is that all occupants' name must be on the contract as well. This is the thing that most investors will miss. This is also something that I'm not aware, but thankfully, I have someone like Carolyn to take care of this for me. Most landlords probably don't know who the long-term occupant is. They may know who is paying the rent and who is signing the contract, but they may have no idea who is actually living in the property, and this can be very dangerous. There has been a case in Vancouver where a daughter have rented a place and moved the mother in from overseas, but afterwards they had a fight and the daughter actually left the property and left the country, leaving the mother alone in the rental unit. Now after a while of not receiving rent, the landlord obviously went to the rental property to check it out and only found the mother there. But because the mother's name is not on the rental contract, she has no obligations to pay rent going forward, and took the landlord more than 9 months before he could remove the mother. Now, second last tip is to use the government's rental agreement instead of some simple drafted or third-party ones. The government's standard contract usually is pretty well-rounded, providing protection for both tenant and landlord, but a lot of landlord doesn't want the hassle and instead will draft their own simple agreement or go on third-party site and download free ones. Now, these can be overly simplified, and when conflict arises, the court will favor the tenants over you, as they are perceived to be the more vulnerable ones. Now, the last tip is to make sure you ask the correct questions to find a proper tenants. Now, according to the article, there are different questions or things you can look at based on different stages of the tenant process. During first contact via phone, text, or email, you should be looking at these things. For example, when do you hope to move in? How many people will be living here? What is your line of work? Is the current rent outside of your budget? And if the answers to these questions are okay to you, then next you will move to a walkthrough with the tenant together through your property. And during these times, these are the questions you should be asking. Why move from the last place? How long you have stayed at the current place? Why move to this neighborhood? How long have you been looking for rental on the market? Have you checked out other places around here? Do you have any contact for old landlord for references? And can we do a credit check on you? This part is very important. Make sure you ask for consent because it is their privacy. And if the renter is a student, then make sure you ask the following. How do you pay for the rent? For example, do you expect to come from job, parents, or student loan? And also, do you intend to do part-time while you're living here and studying? And lastly, some wrap-up questions you can ask is, do you have a car or do you need a car spot? Do you smoke? Do you have pets? And also any concern with the rental contracts. And here, make sure that whatever questions you want to ask, do not infringe or violate someone's personal belief in their religion or sexual orientation. Just make sure you're being respectful to your tenant, then they will be respectful towards you. Alright, so that's everything I wanted to share today. If you like everything I've been saying, hit the like button once. If you don't like them, hit the dislike button twice. Next one I want to hear from you is any tips and tricks that you usually employ when you're looking for your own property. Let me know in the comment down below. And if you like these kind of videos, I do upload them 8:30 EST. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell button to get all the notifications in the future. Alright, this is Jacky. I hope you found this interesting. I'll see you next week. Bye!